I want to show you a really quite exciting option for us to do some transformations to objects in Photoshop. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a image of a sea container. So I've actually tried to hunt down an image of sea containers. Obviously, be aware of copyright. Make sure if you are going to use um, images that are under a copyright sort of thing, that we do make enough changes that they are going to become your own iteration of that, and that they're well enough hidden and you can make enough changes of it. So I've just dragged this image in, and here's my C container. And once again, make sure you don't fudge up the scale and all the rest of it too much. I'm going to apply that. So here's a C container that I want to actually cut out and start using. Now, previously I have mentioned using masks. Masks are great. At this point, I'm actually going to not actually rely on the mask because it's quite a simple shape, and I actually do need to have this cut out to a certain degree as well. Now, it is a smart object at the moment, so I'm actually also going to rasterize this. So at a certain point, smart objects may become redundant, and this might be one of the options here. So I'm going to right click, rasterize that layer. There goes the little icon saying that it is a smart object. Now let's jump in with this. Because this is a nice straight edge thing, I'm going to not mess around with the other stuff. I'm literally just going to grab my poly lasso tool, and I'm going to quickly zip around this and select it as relatively as well as I can, given that I'm doing this pretty quick. So I'm not going to try and fuss around too much with tiny little details. So, and I can always try and do some fixing up later. So there I have that selected. I'm going to have a quick look around it, make sure there's nothing too bad, because once I do delete the outside of this, it's going to be pretty much permanent for this part that I'm going to show you. So obviously if I hit delete, it's going to delete the container because that's what I've got selected. So instead I'm going to go select inverse, select the outside of it, and you can, if you can hopefully see the marching ants on the outside, and then delete that. Now, other option, rather than deleting that, if you do just have that selected as we did originally, where it would delete like that, is you can copy and paste in place. So if you go Command or Control J, that will do a duplicate only of that selected area, and that could be a useful option for you. So either way works. We just want to get that object by itself. Now I'm going to actually bring up my perspective grid. There it is there. And this is going to help me place my object. So I've got my object placed here. Move tool. Note auto select is off so I don't accidentally grab something else. And I want to look at placing this C container in situ. Now there's going to be a few problems, is it doesn't match up to the perspective. Almost anywhere I put it, it's going to be kind of messed up. I'm going to even go one further. I'm going to transform this, right click and flip it horizontally. So I'm going to look at placing it, and let's scale it down a little bit. At this point I'm still using shift and making sure it's not scaled too weird. And I'm going to place it around about here. Actually, let's put it around about here, and apply that. And you can, if you look at this, we can see that it's just not following the perspective grids at all. It just looks out of place, and we turn that grid off and we step back, and it's like, that looks weird. So let's look at a really cool tool that Photoshop has, and this tool in particular is, I'm just going to lower the opacity of the grid a little bit, is specifically great for objects that are kind of rectangular like this. So as long as you can see a front, a side, or a front, a side, top or bottom, you should be good with this one. And it's just over here. It's under edit, and you kind of have to find it, and it is called perspective warp, and it's right there. So there's no actual direct shortcut for that, so you just need to find it, and all you do is you click and it will automatically come up with a grid, and then it's going to be a matter of moving these points to align with one of the faces here. So in this case I'm just going to move it to the front face. Don't forget to zoom in and zoom out, Next, click and drag and start creating the next one. And I'm going to grab these corners and they should snap once you get into close proximity. And then once again, it's a matter of moving those into position. Now, depending on your object, you may need to look at how these align, these middle and end points, but you can have a shift around and get the object in. So as I said, it's good for block rectangular sort of shapes. Once you've done that, what you need to do is you need to go up to the top left here and switch it from layout to warp. By the way, if you've got a top face, then you can click and drag and create another face for that, but this one I can only see the front and a side, so I'm going to switch to warp now. And now what I can actually do is I can start moving these points around and trying to get this to fit a little bit closer to my perspective. And if you press shift, it'll start locking into straight horizontal. So I'm going to move that up. Let's move this across a little bit. Now I'm going to actually start fixing these up to try and match up to my perspective as well. So I'm actually using the perspective guides as a really close option for this. There we have it. That's kind of got to keep that one in mind there. Sometimes you also got to trust your vision for that, and that's getting relatively close for that. I'll probably tuck this one in a little bit more if it was me, but sometimes you got to trust your perspective grids. Sometimes you got to let them go as well. Once you're happy with that, you can either apply or not apply that. So if you're going to be doing this multiple times, I'd recommend, if you're doing multiple of the C containers, is just do a duplicate first. And there we have it. That is going to fit the perspective a lot better. So let's jump back and see what it looked like before. And if we step forwards, we can see that is now affecting our perspective a lot better. I'm going to turn off this perspective grid, and there is a couple of things I want to address while we are here. So obviously one of the things that I usually recommend as a quick fix for your objects is do the color correction as I mentioned in the previous video, hue, saturation, all the rest of it as required. But I'm going to leave that for this one. Because I do want to talk about another aspect which is very important in matte painting, which is shadows. And if you don't have shadows on your object, it can look a little bit weird. Now the lighting's actually incorrect in this object. I've got the light coming from one side or whatever, but we can kind of fudge that. And we've also got shadows popping all over this, but if we look at this, the light is kind of coming from the front area here. This area should be in shadow, and this object should also be casting a shadow. And there's a number of techniques for this. What we can do is we can create a layer underneath, and we could potentially grab a lasso tool and try and guess where the shadow is going to be, like so, and then fill that with black as a starting point. It's a nice easy one. And then change things like the opacity and add a blur to it and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of cool. And then filter blur, Gaussian blur, which allows us a little bit of control, and you could adjust how much of a blur it has. Now this isn't the most precise way of doing it, but it's a good start. Just sort of use your lasso tool. What I'm going to probably show you for this instead is, on a more complex image, let's actually do that with this tower. So let's bring this tower down. I'm going to bring a duplicate of that, and let's bring this to the front layer wise, and let's move this down over here. Let's find a good place for this. The issue that I'm kind of running with this is that it kind of already has, we're already in shadow here, and you really know the perspective's not great for this, but I'm literally just kind of looking for how the shadow's going to work on this. So let's hit continue. So I just want to cut out a few of these little areas. I'm using the wand for this because there's some nice big block areas here, and I'm definitely not looking for precision. I'm going to rasterize this layer as well, because we are going to be doing some funky things with this. So right click, rasterize layer, and I'm just going to delete some of these funky gaps in here So I'm using the wand because it's quick and dirty. So alright, that'll do for now. And let's just say that I'm going to want to have this as having a shadow. Please ignore the perspective, it's completely out. So I'm going to actually apply this mask. So I'm going to right click, apply layer mask, and that's going to cut everything out. So you notice now the image is as it is. It doesn't have a mask, the mask is now applied. And let's look at how I might be able to create an interesting shadow for that. Let's hide the previous one that I did for the C container. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate that layer. So now I've got an exact copy of itself on top of each other. And I'm going to grab the one underneath and I'm going to go Control T to transform. And I'm going to start distorting it. So I'm going to right click again. I'm going to go to distort. And I'm going to start dragging that down and trying to figure out where that shadow might be. So you can see I'm sort of leaving the base where it is, and then I'm going to do a distort and try and figure out what I might do with the shadow. Now this isn't absolutely perfect because you are going to have some weird stuff happening, but in a pinch it's kind of a quick way of creating a shadow effect. Now this doesn't look like a shadow at the moment, it just looks like a stretched image of that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the FX button down here, which is layer styles, and let's go and do something really cool. We're just going to go to color overlay. This is the simple way of doing this. Change the blend mode to normal, change the opacity to 100%. As you can see now I've got orange, just what I had selected previously. I'm going to switch this to black, and this is getting a little bit closer to what we want for a shadow. I'm going to hit OK. Now it's very harsh at the moment. If we go up to the top here to opacity, 100%, if I start lowering the opacity, it will start lowering the opacity of that entire image. And then what I can do is go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and just add a little bit of blur according to how the shadows look. And as you can see, it just adds a little bit more of an effect to it. Now there is another advanced technique for this, which we use gradients for this, but if you really want this to sort of start looking a little bit even more shadow-like, besides just playing around with the opacity of it, you can actually have it so it gets darker as we head outwards from this by adding a mask to it. So now we're adding a mask to this. I can go B for brush and select a soft round opacity brush. So I'm just right clicking in the screen to that, or you can go up to the top here. I'm going to go a lower opacity on this. Let's do say about 30 or 35. Nice big brush. Select black as a color because that's going to allow you to add some start erasing, and then you can actually manually start softening up the edges of that as required. Now this works even better if you've got a Wacom tablet where you can set the pen pressure sensitivity, but shadows will tend to dissipate as we get closer to the outside. And as you can see, it's really just going to get that image to appear a little bit closer to being realistic. Other technique is you can add a new layer underneath and just grab yourself a black brush and actually start painting in, using a nice soft brush. You can start painting in some shadows using a soft black brush, and once again start playing around with the opacity and also potentially the blend modes as well. You can have some interesting effects for that. So that's how we can bring in a object, use a perspective warp on that, or distort I should say, and also how to add a quick shadow to an object as well and get it to integrate a little bit more. Cool. So next video we're going to have a look at a little bit more advanced technique for specific really difficult deep etching, and then after that color correction, and also adding highlights and shadows.